Richard III and the Wars of the Roses. Betrayal, Blood, and Bosworth. What happens when a king steals the crown from his own nephew? Why did storms, betrayals, and secret plots decide the fate of England? How did a teenage exile with a paper-thin claim rise from the shadows to topple Richard III at Bosworth? This is not just history, it's a medieval thriller of blood, roses, and betrayal. From the seeds of war to the princes in the tower, from failed rebellions to the final charge of the dragon banner. This is the story of the last Plantagenet king and the dawn of the Tudors. Stay with us because every twist will leave you asking, what next? Picture England in the mid-15th century. Nobles strutting around in fancy tights, everyone suspicious of everyone else, and two rival houses, York and Lancaster, deciding that sharing power was overrated. The crown was basically a medieval hot potato, tossed back and forth between cousins who all claimed they were the rightful king. The Yorkists, led by Edward IV, were the cool kids on the battlefield. Edward wasn't just tall, handsome, and charismatic, he was also a tactical genius. He proved it at 3 blockbuster battles. Towton, 1461, the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Think of it as medieval WrestleMania, but with swords instead of folding chairs. Edward crushed the Lancastrians and secured his throne. Barnet, 1471, Edward showed up like a rock star, defeating the Earl of Warwick, the so-called kingmaker, who had switched sides more times than a dodgy football fan. Tewkesbury, 1471, Edward's encore performance. He annihilated the Lancastrians, killing Prince Edward, the only son of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou and Edmund of Somerset. Margaret herself was captured. Talk about a bad day at the office. With the Lancastrian leadership basically wiped out, Edward looked unstoppable. But like any good soap opera, there were still plot twists. Jasper Tudor, Henry VI's brother-in-law, was lurking in Wales, hoping to rally support. Edward, ever the strategist, marched his army to Coventry to block him. Meanwhile, Thomas Neville, a cousin of the kingmaker, landed in Kent, gathered 15,000 men, and tried to storm London. Bad move. The Londoners were firmly Team York, slammed the gates shut, and sent word to Edward. By May 21st, Edward was back in London, Henry VI was executed, probably with a dagger in the tower, and Neville's rebellion fizzled like a damp firework. At this point, the Lancastrian dynasty was basically extinct. The only remaining contender was a 14-year-old boy with a paper-thin claim, Henry Tudor. His lineage traced back to John of Gaunt through the Beaufort line, but it was matrilineal and legally shaky. Still, he had one thing going for him: he wasn't dead. Loving the journey so far? Be generous, like the video, subscribe, and share. Let's build this empire together. Henry Tudor and his uncle Jasper tried to flee to France, but Mother Nature had other plans. A storm blew them off course, and they ended up in Brittany. The Duke of Brittany, Francis II, realized Henry was the perfect bargaining chip. He kept the Tudors as guests, read hostages with good catering, refusing Edward's bribes and threats. Meanwhile, Edward IV enjoyed a rare stretch of peace. He even tried to revive England's claim to the French throne, but when Burgundy flaked on him, he settled for a fat bribe from Louis XI in the Treaty of Picquigny, 1475. Basically, Edward said, "Fine, I won't invade France, just pay me to stay home." Of course, peace never lasts when your family tree is full of schemers. Edward's brothers were a handful. George, Duke of Clarence, was executed in 1478 for plotting against Edward. Legend says he was drowned in a barrel of wine. If true, that's both tragic and oddly poetic. Richard of Gloucester, later Richard III, was the loyal brother, rewarded with control of northern England. But fate had other plans. Edward IV died suddenly in 1483 at just 40 years old. Poison? Illness? Too much medieval fast food? Historians still debate it. His son Edward V was only 12, so Richard stepped in as regent. Richard wasted no time. He arrested Queen Elizabeth Woodville's allies, locked Edward V and his younger brother in the Tower of London, and declared them illegitimate. By June 1483, Richard crowned himself Richard III. And the princes? They vanished. No one knows exactly what happened, but rumors swirled that Richard had them killed. Thus was born the chilling legend of the princes in the tower. Queen Elizabeth Woodville was not going to sit quietly while her children were declared illegitimate. No way. She began whispering in the shadows with Margaret Beaufort, the iron-willed mother of young Henry Tudor. Together, these two formidable women hatched a plot that would shake the kingdom. Margaret's new husband, Thomas Stanley, Earl of Derby, was a master of playing both sides. His motto might as well have been, "Keep your options open." Meanwhile, the ambitious Duke of Buckingham, Henry Stafford, decided he'd had enough of Richard's antics and threw his lot in with the rebels. In the fall of 1483, Henry Tudor set sail from Brittany, ready to claim his destiny. But, cue dramatic thunderclaps, storms smashed his fleet. Henry never even made it to England. Meanwhile, Buckingham tried to rally forces in the west and south, but delays, mud, and bad luck slowed him down. Richard pounced like a hawk. The rebellion collapsed, Buckingham was captured, and off with his head. Henry fled back to Brittany, tail between his legs, but now joined by the ragged remains of the rebel army. Richard demanded that Francis II of Brittany hand Henry over. Francis said, "No thanks," but when he fell ill, his ministers started eyeing bribes. Henry, smelling danger, escaped to France like a fugitive in the night. By the end of 1484, Henry played his trump card. He promised to marry Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV. This was genius. It meant uniting the warring houses of York and Lancaster. Suddenly, Henry wasn't just a rebel. He was the man who could end the Wars of the Roses. France's new king, Charles VIII, loved the idea of stirring trouble in England and gave Henry mercenaries. Meanwhile, Richard's wife died, and rumors spread that he wanted to marry his own niece Elizabeth. Yikes. That scandal only made Henry's promise look nobler. On August 1, 1485, Henry set sail from Honfleur, France. By the 7th, he landed in Wales. No obstacles, no resistance. Richard's garrisons were useless. Henry's Welsh blood worked like magic. Local lords flocked to his banner. By the 15th, he marched into England near Shrewsbury. Richard, learning of the landing on the 11th, scrambled to gather his forces. By the 16th, the Yorkist army was on the move toward Leicester. Henry, clever as ever, marched that way too. He needed allies in the area. On August 21st, the armies encamped near Bosworth. Richard took the high ground at Ambion Hill. Henry camped at White Moors, and then there was Thomas Stanley, sitting on the fence at Dadlington with 5,000 men. Would he join Richard? Would he join Henry? No one knew. Stanley was the ultimate wild card. Henry had about 5,000 troops. Richard had closer to 10,000. The tension was electric. At dawn, Henry arrayed his forces in one massive block under John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, a veteran of Barnet. Henry himself held a small reserve. Richard expected Henry to sit back defensively, but no, Henry marched straight at him. Richard quickly formed 3 divisions, John Howard, Duke of Norfolk on the right, Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland on the left, Richard himself in the center. The Yorkist artillery boomed, but Oxford was ready. He shifted his troops to the left, directly against Norfolk, forcing the gunners to stop firing to avoid hitting their own men. Oxford widened his line, and when the clash came, the Tudors began pushing back. Meanwhile, Northumberland just stood there. Was it betrayal? Was it fear of Stanley swooping in? Either way, Richard's left flank was frozen. Henry's dragon banner waved defiantly. Richard, furious, decided to end it himself. He charged with 1,000 horsemen, thundering down the hill straight at Henry. At first, Henry's men wavered. Panic nearly set in. But Henry stood firm. His bodyguards fought like lions. Oxford sent pikemen to stab at Richard's flank, and slowly the king was pushed toward the marshes. Then came the betrayal. Stanley finally moved, sending his brother William to smash into Richard's men from the right. Surrounded, Richard's knights fell one by one. And then, the fatal blow. Richard III was struck in the head and killed. The last Plantagenet king lay dead in the mud. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. Casualties were surprisingly low, but the impact was earth-shaking. Richard's death ended the Wars of the Roses. Henry Tudor was crowned Henry VII, founding the House of Tudor. The Red Rose triumphed, England entered a new age, and the Plantagenets were gone forever. What a story! Betrayal, storms, blockades, scandalous marriage rumors, and a final cavalry charge that ended with a king's skull cracked open. The Wars of the Roses didn't just end. They exploded into legend at Bosworth. And that brings us to the end of our epic saga. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and click the bell button it greatly helps the channel.